Hello, linguists. Welcome to another episode. I am very happy that you're joining us for one more episode. How was your week? Mine has been kind of hectic. This week, uh, I think I shared in the last episode that I'm solo parenting now, so it's been kind of hard. And this week, my fridge decided to die on me with no warning. And it was, again, chaotic with three little ones and no fridge and a bunch of other stuff. But I was looking forward to tonight. This is something that I have planned since January, I think. You probably know by the thumbnail who is our guest tonight is the greatest Katherine Allen is with us. Welcome, Katherine.
Hi, thank you
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me.
And thank you so much for coming, for accepting the invitation. For those of you who don't know who Katherine is, I'm going to read a little bio about her. Katherine Allen is a community and conference interpreter with over 3 decades of experience interpreting, training, and designing curricula. She has co-founded Interpret America. Katherine is the lead author of the Indigenous Interpreter Manual and Workbook and has helped embed professional interpreting into medical missions in Mexico and in military global health curricula. She teaches for UMass Amherst's online interpreting and translation certificate and formerly for the Glendon College Masters in Conference Interpreting. Katherine is co-author of several interpreting textbooks and multiple training courses. She speaks regularly at conferences and industry events. Katherine has an MA in Translation and Interpretation from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. So, for those of you who didn't know, that's Katherine Allen. So, thank you so much for coming, Katherine. Again, how have you been?
Oh, well, I think I've been probably how all of us have been, right? Trying to do our careers from our Zoom, in front of our Zoom screen, right? Or our video screen.
You were a little bit, from what I've been following and watching with Interpret America, you kind of were, without knowing, preparing for this, along with Mr. Barry Olson, weren't you?
Well, you mean in terms of being in front of a video screen all the time? Yeah, it is interesting because I was able to land on my feet when, in March, when everybody lost all their work, because I had done so much work with technology and remote training, and not so much remote interpreting, even though I knew a lot about it. I hadn't done as much as I've done now, but I had definitely been teaching online and knew a lot about, how technology and how remote interpretation was playing out in our field. So yeah, it was a little ironic because it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be ready for this. So I feel very fortunate for that, because I was able to, to shift and adapt. And it wasn't as easy for all of us. I know many are still really struggling, right? Because we're nowhere near as back to normal.
I agree. I attended the farewell, what do you say, party?
Our finale.
Yes, your Interpret America farewell. And that was very eye-opening for me, someone in Texas who is just starting in this. And I saw, honestly, a huge gap between interpreters, or what I've known interpreters know and do in Texas, versus what interpreters in California with Interpret America have been doing. So that was kind of eye-opening, I guess. And I was like, I want some of that for next time, next time that something like this happens, which I think that there's always a next time. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think that one of the things I love about this career, which I imagine you're finding out and will continue to find out as you interview people, I think a podcast is just a brilliant idea as a way to actually get to know your own profession, right? Can't go to conferences right now as easily to get to know your profession. But you'll see just how broad it is. Like, I love this profession because there's so many different corners and parts of it and ways to specialize. And so if you've only been in one area, it might seem like, oh, wow, like people are doing it differently elsewhere. But actually, I think it's just more that it's a big industry. It's a big profession, right? And so there are lots of people in California doing what you're doing, and lots of people in Texas actually who are working in the other arenas as well.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that this week we actually posted an episode that we had with my colleague Mario Sulit, who was saying exactly that, that our profession is so diverse.
Yeah.
We have so many other things to consider. So today, um, there are many, many topics to talk about, but I wanted to focus on, I think, one of the most important ones, maybe one a very relevant one nowadays, which is educational interpreting. You have been working on a lot of this topic, educational interpreting. I want to get your point of view. Maybe you can give us some insight about it, and all, some other topics that we're going to be considering is the specialization in educational interpreting, settings for educational interpreting and aspects that maybe someone interested in specializing in this field should consider: programs, preparation, status of code of ethics for educational interpreting, and associations for educational interpreters and translators. And you're gonna help us with all that.
Okay, but you have to give me a starting question or I won't
I
know where to
will.
begin.
Don't worry, I will.
We'll
I
see how much
wanted
we can
to.
cover.
Yes. So please let us know, where are you watching us from? I know that there are some people already. Thank you so much for those of you who are liking it and sharing it. Please go ahead and share as much as you can, especially if you're interested in this type of field. So let's start with our interview. Katherine, tell us a little bit about how this whole thing with educational interpreting started with you. Does Title VI
For
have
me.
anything to do with it? Uh-huh.
Well, let's see. So I'll answer the first question. I'm joining you from Bishop, California, a town of 5,000 people in north central California in the mountains. So I'm joining you rurally, and that is relevant actually to your second question because I've lived here for a long time, and my first experiences as a community interpreter were in education. It was untrained. I had no training, I didn't know what I was doing. But when I started to have kids, I went freelance, and I did a lot of educational and social service and special ed and rehab and early intervention interpreting in my communities for quite a long time. And it's really where I started building my kind of career until I finally figured out that I wanted to have this be a career. And then I started working towards, an educational pathway, which took me quite a long ways away from educational interpreting for a long time. And then it's kind of circled back around. So for me, it's to see this area of interpreting begin to formalize and solidify and become an actual specialization is really exciting for me because it's very close to my heart and to my own origins. Yeah.
So it started because you were a mom, basically? That's what you're telling me?
In some ways. So I came into the profession, unlike you, who I understand got to study this field formally, in your native country first and came in. I came in with, a BA in development studies, international relations. I'd lived in Chile and, and traveled quite a bit for several years in my 20s. And so I was like that classic person I was proficient and bilingual, but not untrained. And then I moved into an area where that skill set was needed. And I just got pulled into it. Can you interpret? Can you interpret? I originally started working out in mental health, for the mental health, our local county mental health department, and was soon just being pulled, just kind of that classic story, at least for people like my age, right? A lot of us got pulled in because we were bilingual. And then the light bulb goes off. It goes, this could be a career, right? So I had that. And so when I had little kids, it was a good way for me to, do work. I was doing freelance work and trying to figure out how to get educated in the field.
And the reason why I asked that is because I have I don't like how it sounds, but it is what it is. A special needs kid that I had to train when I came here to the States, and he started his elementary school. I had to train myself and read a whole lot to get all the benefits that he could get, right? And he did.
Right.
But I really had to read through a lot. And so we're going to get to that in a little a little later tonight, but that's why I was asking, because educational interpreting does interest me a lot as an interpreter, because I guess I kind of have a vested interest in things being done the right way.
Well, I'll tell you, just before you move on, one of the things that really shaped my sense of the jeopardy that we hold in our hands as the interpreter was I was doing that interpreting for special education meetings and early intervention meetings really before most of the community had any access to the internet. So that ability to like that you just said that now we all will do, like, okay, what are my rights and what does this program offer? What does, how are they supposed to be doing it? Like that information was the only time the families that we were interpreting for would get that information, even in a somewhat filtered way, would be in these meetings they'd have, and I'd be the single point of connection between the two linguistically. And I walked away from so many of those meetings just anguished, knowing that for all the good intentions of the providers, the families really didn't understand their rights. They didn't understand the system they were in. They didn't know how to start, educating themselves about how to advocate for themselves. And it was real. That's one of the reasons I ended up in leadership in other areas, because I just was always biting my tongue. I just wanted to, I wanted there to be a better access. It was scary to me that I was the single point of access for like a 2-hour meeting once every 4 months. And that was kind of all the parents would get,
Wow.
about, yeah. So
you're saying something really interesting, because it is, again, we're going to touch on it more specifically a little later, but it is not only the interpreting part, but it's so much more than that. It even goes beyond that, because you that have lived in Chile know that the culture and the expectations are probably most likely completely different than the expectations for parents here and educators here. So yeah, I can totally understand.
Or to be a native, English speaker, white American woman who learned her Spanish in South America and then had never been to Mexico, but was working almost exclusively with Mexican immigrants. I mean, there's just a whole lot of layers there to how to make sure you're actually communicating accurately, right? Because I had to learn our local Mexican immigrant communities, cultures, and expectations without ever having been to Mexico, right? So there's just a lot of, and as interpreters, whether it's, you flip it sideways, and every interpreter deals with that, right? Like which cultural aspect, which region, which this, which that, like we're always trying to take those responsibilities, into account.
So then what aspects, let's start talking about this a little more. What aspects and settings are involved in educational interpreting?
So you asked a little bit before, I know you're curious about Title VI and is that where educational interpreting started? It's certainly not where it started. I mean, I think if you want perspective, we think about legal interpreting sort of established, first, conference interpreting established first, but you had legal interpreting established in the 70s, and you had medical, more formally establish itself kind of in the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And all of those were governed by Title VI, which is this, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which says that you can't discriminate against national origin, right? So it's not about over time, the courts have decided you have to provide a language bridge in order to avoid discrimination. So the schools have always had that. They've always had the same requirement, and they've had more people providing interpreting probably than the courts or the hospitals combined, because there are more school districts than there are hospitals or courts in the country. But it wasn't where the focus was. Like the focus was on legal and medical. I think that the jeopardy was so high for language access there that for a lot of different reasons, those two areas developed first. But that didn't mean that people weren't, this audience knows, it's like if you work in educational settings, you've been on your own mostly, right? You're on your own trying to figure out, exactly like I was in my early days, like
right,
what's legal, what's best practice, what should I be doing, what are my ethics, who should I follow, where can I get training, or you don't even think of yourself as an interpreter or translator. It's just something you're asked to do. So educational interpreting is catching up, but they've always had the same requirements, and even more so because there are more laws that govern sort of access and education and services in the educational settings than there are in medical in some ways, right? Because you have all the special ed laws, you have the ADA, you have a lot of other laws.
Yeah, and so for the people that are, let's say, interested in this, let's kind of draw the setting for them.
So educational interpreting, I think, people are kind of, so there's a couple of things to think about. First of all, let's just give a nod to sign language interpreting. And an educational interpreter for the sign language, I think we're all familiar with the idea of that interpreter that follows the student through their educational day and pathway. That's not spoken language interpreting in educational settings, right? That's actually a specific role. Many states legislate it. It's legislated and governed and regulated. And in that role, the interpreter is much more part of the educational team of that child and may be expected to play roles above and beyond the interpreting role. Sign language interpreters that come in to interpret for parents in IEPs and things like that are more like spoken language interpreters. So for spoken language interpreters, the setting is K through 12 is what we're talking about. And to me, the setting is probably the most diverse setting of any specialization, because you go from individual conversations between parents and teachers to complicated group settings with special education, to back to school nights, to school board meetings and public presentations, and even to press conferences, right? So you end up needing a very, very diverse and well-developed skill set actually to do it. It's a super diverse setting.
It's interesting because you were mentioning the ASL interpreters who, have obviously more established code of ethics. As you say, they are part of the team. Do you think that spoken language interpreters will get there eventually?
I do, actually, because that's what we're seeing. What we're seeing in educational interpreting all across the country is exactly what happened in medical interpreting, but with the benefit of much easier communication and connectivity, right? Because now we have social media, and so in medical interpreting, you had this, all over the country, it started to hit the tipping point of like, hey, we need to formalize and professionalize and have best practices. So that's happening. There's many states and many school districts have already created local ethics and standards of practice and best practices right in their own systems. You've got some states that are definitely have done a lot of work, such as Minnesota and Washington State, have done a lot of work in these areas. And then, about a year and a half ago, a group of people who were interested in this area sort of put out a call to see if there was interest in a national organization. And so we founded the Interpreting and Translation and Education Work Group, which is really trying to follow a step-by-step process of helping to professionalize the field on a national basis. And it's a big, heavy lift because you have to build those relationships, you have to build your organization, right? But the goal, ultimately, taking our lessons learned from other specializations, is to do the groundwork you need to really figure out, okay, we all have an idea of what basic ethical principles need to be there, but how are we really going to apply that to an educational setting and beyond just the special education setting? So the group, the ITE work group, we're going through a very formal process of doing a job task analysis and doing an ethics and standards analysis as well of everything that's already existing, and ultimately to work through something that that really reflects the work that educational interpreters are doing, and translators. Actually, we're looking at translation as well, if that makes sense. So we're kind of in the beginning stages of that process.
Yeah, you have been working on developing this code of ethics, and it's for Orange County, I believe, right, in California? Or
no, it is not California based. Actually, it just started. Okay. The first meeting we held at the Orange County. So the Orange County Department of Education has one of the few conferences for educational interpreters and translators, right, in the country, and we're just beginning to see conferences for educational interpreting and translation. And so they have a conference that they're very good at it. It's really grown fast. So they offered us space year and a half ago to hold our first meeting, and we did it online and on site just to see if there was interest. And then we got a lot of interest from all over the country. And so the group has, since formed, we've got leadership and committees working, and we're in the process of becoming a legally organization with a board of directors. And we're just building the organization at the same time that we're working on the process. But I think one of the things that we've really learned from medical interpreting, I think, is this idea of this process of a job task analysis. And this is what the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare did when they created their national ethics. And there were very robust state ethics already in place, but they did this big national process. And it's also what CCHI and the National Board have done for the certification, where you go and you really figure out, well, what are they doing? Like, what do you do? Does your day include translation and interpreting? Does it include consecutive and simultaneous? Does it include advocacy or not? What does it include? What are you actually doing on the job? And you really can't build ethics and standards of practice until you have that understanding. And so that's part of the foundational work we're really focused on right now.
Right now, it's more like building up the statistics than analyzing them. And how long did it take, I guess, for the medical code of ethics to be developed?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, I don't know that. I mean, I'm trying to think. Probably it took us several years. I know. Hopefully, it won't take us that long because we've got more tools, and you can do national surveys much more easily. But I was at the time part of the California Healthcare Interpreting Association on their board, and California had, Massachusetts had the first really robust code of ethics for medical interpreters, and then California followed, and then the National Council followed, and they had a big survey. They had a committee that worked on it that, sorted out all the information and came up with the tenets. And so it's a process, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely a process.
Like it's going to be.
But I think, and we can shift about the one thing I'd say about it is I think it is so important because right now, educational interpreting is part of community interpreting, as is medical and social service, right? Because you're interpreting in a place where a service is being given. But educational interpreting is highly legal as well. And people are any kind of special education meeting is in essence a legal meeting as well. And this is what the field has to grapple with. It's like, when I walk into a meeting, what ethics do I follow? Is this how much jeopardy am I in for legal liability? How much of it, what is how collaborative is this? How much do I need to be really just very, very strict and not do any kind of, mediating to say, hey, there might be a problem here, right? These are the things that make it so interesting for me, but which are not resolved, right? That, it's like we have to make a lot of decisions about, what kind of ethical code is going to cover all of that with any kind of grace or clarity, right? So.
And the reason why we are touching on medical interpreting or the medical code of ethics for interpreters is because right now educational interpreters use that code of ethics to go to meetings, but the work that you're doing is towards building our own, or I should say not our, I consider myself an educational interpreter. I'm not yet, but that's the goal, to build a code of ethics specifically for educational interpreters.
Yeah, I think, yes. If we're just like, for example, the ethical process, if you start back with conference interpreting, which is really the first modern area that developed in our field, there are ethics they follow. I mean, we all follow the same basic core tenets, confidentiality and professionalism and different things. But the way that plays out is, certainly different in a diplomatic arena than it is in a business arena, than it is in legal and court, as you well know from your court work, right? There's things there's just a lot of strict protocol you have to follow, right, as the interpreter. And that's what we need for educational. I have so many colleagues who spend, the first part of their day, they might be doing special education meetings, and then they go to the evening and they become a conference interpreter for school board meetings. And they're using a conference interpreting skill set and they're using a legal interpreting skill set, and then they may be using a community interpreting skill set earlier on, right? And we don't, there is no, I have not, that's what we're trying to get to, some kind of code of ethics that really provides enough guidance for people to make professional decisions, in the middle of those different settings.
So in the meantime, I was asking this past couple of weeks to my colleagues, like, what are they interested in? And a lot of them showed a lot of interest in wanting to learn more about what kind of specialization they should start focusing to go and feel like they are doing a fair,
A fair job.
a first job and a first service as well to the people that they're interpreting for, especially the parents and the kids. That's what we're all thinking about. So what would you say to that?
Well, educational interpreting is interesting because it may have the most employed group, the largest group of, we don't know for sure, but that's my sense, is there are more people who are actually working as employees of districts as opposed to freelance. There are certainly many freelance interpreters, but generally our field is about 75% freelance. But there are a lot, school districts hire a lot of people to do, and they usually call, often they're called the district translator, and they do both interpreting and translation. There's no separation between, those skill sets. So we have a long way to go. But so to me, it really depends on what kind of, where, there are school districts where the bulk of what the interpreters do is special education interpreting. Mm-hmm. There are school districts where the bulk of what they do actually is simultaneous for all of the board meetings and public meetings that happen, right? Those are really different skill sets. So, I think part of it is if you're interested in certainly if you sign up for language company agencies, if that's the route you're going to go, you're probably going to get sent, to some kind of parent-teacher meeting, school teacher. And so you need to be, the first thing you need to know is to understand the setting, right? Mm-hmm. You got to read about the laws. And if I'm going to go, if I'm going to work for a particular school, the first thing I do is to go to that school district's website and read everything I possibly can that's relevant to my setting. So I understand the school district and how it's running and what their programs are, right? And then because it's such specialized, like you have to have an understanding of the laws that govern what's happening in the classroom, because that's what's going to be talked about in those settings, right? So we can't get away. It's just like medical interpreters have to have a basic understanding of the medical system. So you need to understand the educational system. And if you're going to go to a simultaneous school board meeting, you better get those documents ahead of time. And you're really going to have to prep for that one.
Right.
Because it's going to be simultaneous, right? And it's going to be long and hard. So.
And that's like, you obviously require the basic skills for an interpreter or a translator. But on top of that, you also require, as you're saying, knowledge about the law in education. Like, what is an IUP? Here in Texas, exactly. It's not called an IUP, it's called an ARD. Right. Or a 504, and what does it entail? When does it go from a 504 to an IUP or to an ARD? And those are, I guess, legal details.
They're legal, and you're going to walk into the middle of that conversation, right? That's the thing that unless you work at the school and you repeat with the same families, if you're coming in as a freelancer, you're going to walk into the middle of a conversation with groups of people who've already met multiple times with each other. Right. And if you don't understand what's happening with that child and that family and which particular, for example, one of the last IEPs I was asked to do locally was for a child who had 6 separate huge genetic illnesses. So this was a child that was receiving all kinds of medical and in-home service and physical therapy and speech therapy and occupational therapy, right? So I spent a fair amount of time just learning about those diseases, so I had some understanding, of what was going on. You just have to, no matter where you're interpreting, you need to understand the setting, right? But I would say more than that, it's like, know your skill set and understand which skill set is required for the assignments you're offered. So if you don't have a good simultaneous interpreting, then don't say yes. If you, right? are really confident with your consecutive, and hopefully you have a note-taking skill set. I mean, I really feel like educational interpreting requires, you can't just say, oh, I'm just a consecutive interpreter, I don't do simultaneous. I don't think you can really get away with that in educational settings. So many educational interpreters have just had to self-train, right? They do all the modes and they're self-trained a lot of the time.
That's very interesting. And there's a question that is coming to from what you just said, but I do want to take just a few seconds to say hello to Alex. He's watching us from Long Beach, California. Then we have Nora, my friend from Spring, Texas.
I think I know that, Alex.
We have Vanessa from Phoenix, Arizona. Lubinka, I'm sorry if yes.
Hi, everybody.
Minnesota. Natalia. And Ernesto, thank you for joining us. Please send us your questions. Send us all the questions that you have. We have about 30 minutes left, so just type them all. So what was coming, the idea that I was getting from what you were just saying is maybe educational interpreting would be even more suitable for well-seasoned interpreters that have been already developing all of the simultaneous, consecutive, side translation skills, and they already know everything about. They already have a very solid base of interpretation in general, and maybe even for translators the same case, but then they can focus a little more on the legal part of the educational setting.
Well, I think what happens in reality is that people get hired because they're bilingual. I mean, it really depends on the school district. Like there are school districts all across the country that have deepened their knowledge and actually created translation and interpreting departments, and like Orange County in California is an example, and there are many school districts in Texas and Georgia and Minnesota and other places, right, in Washington, that have formalized it. And then there are school districts that have done nothing. So the advertisement goes out for the school translator, and I've seen advertisements, for example, in farm regions in California that want trilingual interpreters, English, Spanish, and an indigenous language, with a high school education. And then they describe what that person is expected to do. And it's like, you need a master's degree to do that well, right? And so I think we're in that kind of we're like, we're like mixing all the ingredients. You've got people who are coming in because they're bilingual, and then they're just being thrown into that job. And my heart just goes out to all of those people who are having to do that, because it's very hard to feel successful when you're not trained, and these are difficult assignments. But then they learn and they self-train and they get better, and and then I have many colleagues who are like you. They've got their degrees in interpreting translation and have gone in, with that kind of background, and then they go in, and sooner or later they start professionalizing their school districts. That's what I see happening, over and over.
So then what programs do you think, or do you know of any programs that you would suggest for us to go and get as much information as we can get, or preparation as we can get, to go into an educational field setting? And yes.
So it depends on where you are, right? There are some, like I said, there are some states that have developed, you're beginning to see more training specifically for educational. And so the way that I would try and find that myself would be to start looking at community college certificates, training, look for community interpreting certificates or translation and interpreting certificates. And there are, 1 and 2-year programs that you're going to find some, that either include educational interpreting as a track, or maybe are completely for educational interpreting. Minnesota has one that specifically focuses on special education. So they're beginning to pop up, and you just, come on, guys, got to use the Google, right? Right? It's like, nobody's going to hand this to you in like a nice complete list. It's really in flux. But
because it's new.
Because it's new, right? I mean, like, we're beginning to formalize it. And then I would just say really, really, really encourage, these 40-hour programs that we've got going that train you, like, they're just orientations. So they're just the beginning. Like, you got to really continue and, do what professionals do. Pick a professional association, pick trainings, invest in your education, invest in your, take the workshops on consecutive and simultaneous and build your skill set, right? It takes, this is a profession that requires a lot of practice to do well. I see
constantly. Yeah, there's a question from Nora. And how do you bring awareness to the schools regarding the importance of a qualified interpreter? You touch a little bit on that, but can you expand?
Well, I have colleagues who do amazing work around this. I think that, anything you can do. I want to refer you to Natalia Barca from the Orange County, because she's done so much about, she's done so much work on how to, educate. But you start with what your school's mission is and what it has to comply, what it's supposed to be doing for its families, and you advocate from within that structure. So if the school's primary mission is to bring equality to all students, or whatever it is, you start bringing in, hey, do you know this is our, that Title VI says XYZ, and this is what we need to have. And, it depends on who your bosses are and who your administrators are, right? But it is, unfortunately, it typically does fall on the lead interpreters and translators to put together these kinds of materials. So this is one of the reasons why it's so important to, go to the conferences, or if you want to, we do have a national listserv with the IT work group that's free right now. It's got about 400 people on it. And that's the kind of thing you can pop on hey, how do you guys, so that this is the value and the power of a listserv, because you can say, how are you guys educating, your administrators? Because I know, I've got so many colleagues who they have PowerPoints and they put together materials, and they meet with their administrators and they find the use cases, and but you have to, unfortunately, there's not like a given package, but you do have a lot of colleagues who are building these materials out. And so, if somebody wants to email me afterwards, I could actually just try to help people connect, because I'm not working in a school district, so I don't have those materials myself. But that makes sense. But this is what we had to do in medical too. It's like every medical interpreter coordinator became the educator, for the hospital administrators. And it's just been it's a slow process, but it does make change.
And so this question is for Spanish vocabulary in particular. Do you know of anything? Everything that I've read so far has been on websites from the government that talk about these types of laws, 504, IEPs, ARDs.
So there are, again, if some of the people who are also, like you mentioned, who are listening, could put things in the chat window for me. I don't have a list right at me.
Yeah,
but
go ahead and do that,
Nancy, but there are, there's actually some books in Spanish and English you can buy on Amazon. It's pretty good glossaries. There's a really excellent COVID-19 glossary that just came out, that's been updated in Spanish and English. And that's actually the language you can get the most out of. A lot of school districts have put together very robust glossaries. The LA Unified School District has one they put out 20 years ago that people, that is still quite robust. That they've used. So you have to just do that Googling. But again, maybe so I see we've got Luis Hernandez is sharing. So anybody who can share, I don't have them at my fingertips, but there are quite a few resources actually in Spanish. It's the other languages that's harder.
He's saying Language Services has a glossary too. Yeah. Thank you so much, Luis. Yeah. Yes, those are really good. So resources.
I'll just say one thing again. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say in that. It's I have been searching the internet for 15 years to find this stuff. I was translating IEPs in a translation team 15 years ago. And even then I Googled and could find resources. So just really search, because they exist, right? These things, they're there.
Yes, they are. Daniel Villarreal says, are there work opportunities for Spanish to English translators or for freelance writers with backgrounds in pedagogy with American school districts?
Yes, there's many, I don't know if it's going to be at the pay rate you want or what you want it to be, but, many school districts, it is the biggest language group in the US, and many school districts hire translators. They have dedicated translators and interpreters on their staff. So yes, you just have to go. I don't know where you want to work or where you are, but if you want
I'm
to work
wondering
on
if it
site.
would be a good idea to go to your, as you said, your school district from your area, and
Yeah,
just offer to see if anyone is interested. And thank you, Isabel.
yeah,
I'm studying with Isabel. Isabel is my study buddy, and she's sharing this whole website. It's the cde.ca.gov, and
yeah.
go ahead and check it out if you're interested. Thank you, Isabel, for that. So tell us, what is the stage that you guys are on, if you can share that with us, with the code of ethics?
With the code of ethics.
Yeah.
Oh, I want Loana to come on. Well, one thing I put in our I think I put it in the chat I have with you, so you can share it. I don't know if you've shared it out, but we are currently in the middle of a survey um, that we've been sending out for the last several months everywhere we can across the country, asking for it's more of a survey on what kinds of experiences and challenges and ethical dilemmas people are running into in real life at their work site. So right now, the people who are heading our ethics and standards committee are just very impressive people to me, because they have a very sort of scripted way that they're trying to first, gather all the ethics and standards of practice that already exist and do a comparison of them, and then gather as much real life, information about what people are going through. And if you go to our the itworkgroup.org website and go and look at the, where we've posted the videos of our last annual meeting, we also posted the PowerPoint for that. And the PowerPoint shows you this process that they're going through. So basically it's still very much in an analysis and information gathering stage. You have to sort of figure out what are going to be the primary principles that will be included and what would be the standards of practice.
And I guess that's the way we can help as interpreters, is by going there, filling out that survey,
Yes.
and helping you guys get data so you can come up with all this code of ethics that we so much need.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The Ernesto Jimenez is sharing another glossary. He says that it was tremendously helpful for him. So thank you so much, Ernesto. He's
That's the
always
Los Angeles Unified School District glossary. I have it. Yeah.
perfect.
That's very, very helpful.
That's awesome. So, Katharine, you have told us about your, I guess, perspective from how can we prepare, how can we train ourselves to become educational interpreters. What do you think that we should take from ASL interpreters? How the way they did it at the beginning? How can we share some of that, bring it to spoken languages interpretation, and make it happen?
That's interesting, isn't it? So sign language interpreting there are a lot of differences that allowed it to develop a little bit sooner, and to have a more empowered interpreter workforce, as well as sort of the deaf and hard of hearing and everybody who uses the services. But this is a field that really got kickstarted by the ADA, right? The American Disabilities Act. So it's not covered quite. Of course, it's covered by Title VI as well, but it's also covered by the American Disabilities Act, and under that, and it is serving a population of mostly U.S. born citizens, right? So there's a much more empowered base there. It's much harder, I think, for immigrant families to, lawsuits and insist on their rights, and the jeopardy around all that. We all know how complicated that is for immigrant families. So you have a very empowered, group that fight for their rights, and they are actually born here and sort of are more empowered to do that. And you also have an interpreting field that is just ahead of us, right? They have a very strict, they've got an educational pathway to becoming professionalized, and for the most part, people have at least an AA degree, at least have 2 years of it, education specifically in it. And because of the way the laws have played out, they get paid more, and they ask for more and can ask for more. So how do we transfer that? I think just by doing the work we're doing. I think that getting Boy, the getting probably the biggest work we can do beyond the work we individually can do to professionalize ourselves and to participate in these new groups, that are coming out, is actually to make what we do as visible as possible. Because that's what I see over and over and over again in our field. People don't understand what we do, and they just think, it's a very automated, experience. And they, oh, it's okay, she can do this, she can do that, she's bilingual, she can do everything, right? And we're still really struggling on across the entire profession. People don't understand that what we do is hard, needs training, and should be paid, right? And so to me, my big passion is always, how can we make our profession visible? So things like this is great. Like having the podcast makes us more visible. And
Yes, that's the goal, for one. Now, this is an idea that I shared it with our ASL interpreter guest. And my memory, of course, I am super excited. It's not working right now. Rafael Trevino, there it is. And Rafael Trevino was here, and he was talking about ASL interpreting, and he had some really good ideas. One of my ideas, and I don't know how common this is, I haven't heard about it, but of course I'm not so involved, is going to high schools and presenting interpretation and translation as an actual career, as an actual profession. Because I mean, I live in the outskirts, I guess, of Houston, you could say, and a lot of kids don't know that this is a
and they have this
profession.
precious bilingual resource that they could be. Yeah, no, the American Translators Association has a long-standing school education effort where they encourage people to do those presentations, and then they give, every year somebody gets a free conference. They put, you can send in, like if you speak to a class and send in a picture of it, they'll pick a winner, and then they'll give a free conference registration. Yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah,
I think Miss Lester was the last one who won the prize, or I think
I think
she
so.
was
Yeah,
one of them.
she got an award. Yeah, so there's,
Yeah.
I mean, in all aspects, but I was interacting with some high-level conference interpreters just this week, and they were telling these horror stories of having to like put their camera on the event because the people listening didn't understand that it was a human being interpreting. They thought it was a machine.
Oh,
Right? Because in conference events, interpreters, keep their camera off, right? And it's just, even at that level, the people listening just think it's like, oh, I get to click on this button and I just hear this Spanish or this, Portuguese or this French. And I mean, there's so much misunderstanding. We have all these devices, say magical, put this in your ear and talk to your, the French person on your trip to Europe or whatever. And great. Okay. So you can, say, where's the hotel? But
yeah.
people are just waiting for that automated, interpreter. And
Right.
so it's just a constant battle, it's a constant battle.
So funny that you say that, because I remember when I was in immigration court, there was a case that we had. It wasn't in Spanish; it was an indigenous language, and the respondent thought it was also a machine. The interpreter was on the phone, and he thought it was a machine. And then on another day, same respondent came over, and he met the interpreter in person, and he was just mesmerized. I thought it was a machine. But it's funny that you say that. It's pretty parallel, but from someone that probably has a lot of
really wide from one end of the field to the other. Yeah. It is.
So this is by the way, thank you so much, guys, for interacting. This is wonderful. I love that all of you are sharing all of these resources and information. This is a dream. So my last question would be, technology is taking over. You mentioned that it might be actually helpful to move this faster forward. So that would be my question. How do you see technology helping educational interpreters getting more light, letting the schools know that we need to be specialized in the educational field? Do you think we can use technology in our favor?
Boy, I'd love to ask your audience that. I mean, right now what I'm seeing, So educational interpret. So there are two areas of interpreting absolutely cratered when COVID hit, and it was conference and educational. They were the two sectors that lost the most work. They absolutely cratered because there was almost no remote interpreting built into the profession yet, right? Like school districts weren't medical, on the medical side, business side, financial side, there's a lot of remote. And so there was like an infrastructure for that.
Right.
So the price that I'm seeing paid is that the schools do not take language into consideration when they pick their platforms, and the platforms they've picked don't have interpreting channels on them. And so now everybody, I know everybody listening here has probably done remote meetings where they are themselves having to figure out how this all works. And then now we're ending up often we're even having to be the ones to educate. Like, to me, it hasn't hit a point. It's like, it kind of rescued access a little bit. I mean, I think it helped I think we still lost a lot of language access and have still lost a lot, but in terms of like how to help people understand what we do, I'm not sure if technology is so much the answer as the other work, right? Like the work of making us visible, of having like PR campaigns and, going to the right places and showing what we do and getting people the ahas and doing that hard work of helping them understand, that we're not robots. So,
and it's good.
It's a hard question.
It's good to know that problem, though, because once you know that it exists, maybe you can start working on it. So yeah, that's a good approach. And I thank you so much, Katharine, for all this information. We have, as we've been showing, the Interpret America website for you.
So I will just say that for those of you know, so this is a 10-year, partnership with Barry Olson that we did wrap up this in January, but the website is up and all the resources are there still. I'm switching my personal brand. I haven't quite figured out my own website yet, but thank you for showing that. And if people want to see past stuff and get.
And is this where they can contact you? Can they find an email or something to contact you there?
Yeah, you can contact me there. Yeah, definitely you can contact me there. So and I appreciate too just your focus on educational interpreting and it's just, I think it's an area where there's so much. We just really, really need to be supporting each other and getting connected. And so if I was going to give a plug, am I allowed to give a final plug? This is my plug. It's always my plug.
Yeah.
Because community interpreting is still developing. So I've been at this long enough to know the power of connection, right? So whether you connect with the IT work group, whether you connect with other organizations in your state, whether you connect to, professional associations that have groups dedicated to this, if you're working in educational interpreting and feel isolated, join a professional association, join a group, get connected, because that is how we professionalize. And I also have been at this long enough to see that it doesn't take as long as we think it will. When I started in this field, there was no certification for healthcare interpreters. There was barely a job description for interpreter coordinator in hospitals, right? None of that existed. And in 15 years, that's spread across the entire country. So stay connected and support each other. And, let's move this along, because I know like 10 years from now, we could really be looking at something much more organized and much more supportive of everybody doing the work you do, because the work you do is so important. So.
Yes, everyone should put a little bit of, a little bit of help, and we can make this.
But don't stay in isolation, right? It's not going to come to you.
No,
you go to them. Yeah.
Right. Obviously,
right.
Yes. Yeah. That's the only way that we can get more knowledge, by sharing. Daniel Villarreal is sharing this amazing suggestion. Reach out to the American branch or branches of Mexico's UNAM, the Spanish Initials for National Autonomous University of Mexico. I took a superb advanced Spanish courses in the San Antonio, Texas branch. There might be one in LAX now. Can't have too many contacts. Yeah. Exactly what you said.
And Mexico has many, many, many programs and degree programs in translation interpretation, some really great colleagues. And we're all connected virtually now. So
yes, I think that's the greatest thing that has happened since 2020 is the connection that we can all have. So thank you so much. Nora wants me to. Nora is my friend that I started the linguists with. If you are an OG, you probably know Nora from the first episodes. So She's part of HITA Group. If you're in Houston, you can join hitagroup.org, and we are developing some mentorship programs that they are going to take you far in your specialization if you're interested. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Katherine. Again,
Thank
I really
you. It
appreciate
was a pleasure.
your time, and thank you guys for interacting so much with each
Thanks for,
other.
yeah, no, thanks for logging on, everybody. I really appreciate
Yes.
it.
Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye,
All
everyone.
right. Bye-bye.